Hey friend, I have a guided reading for you today. Feel free as I'm talking to gaze at the cards, see if anything tickles your own intuition. Don't mind my voice is a little bit scratchy right now and I'm playing with a new microphone, but let's go ahead and get started. Guiding our reading today, we have the Lady of the Harvest. All right. This is very much getting the fruits of your labors. You get what you put in. You know, something right now is coming to a point where you are starting to enjoy the rewards for some sort of an effort that you've been, putting towards something, right? Initially, you had this inspiration. We have the Ace of Wands, right? That would be that storytelling, around the campfire, that ignition within yourself, something that inspired you to kind of step out, really kind of take your own power, really go on your own adventure, right? Perhaps when you have this initial inspiration, you find yourself in this Six of Cups. That's that daydreaming hour, imagining the possibilities. What if I do this? What if I do that? Right? And that is that first step, right? When you start out on a new thing, you're probably imagining what it's going to look like when you succeed, what it's going to look like when you're really prospering and, doing the thing very well, right? That is that emperor energy. Okay, there's a certain amount of sovereignty that you're reaching for because you realize that you can have more than, what you've been told. You realize that, you don't have to necessarily just do the 9 to 5, even if that's something that you're currently still doing right now. You've decided that you wanted to build towards something for yourself. You wanted to create some sort of a better reality for you, to experience. Initially we come into this Knight of Wands, right? You're pretty excited, right? You have the new possibilities. I'm going to try this thing, I'm going to try that thing. Let's say for example, if you start a business, you're somebody who really likes to bake. You open up your own bakery, you're like, what if I make this cake? What if I make this pie? What if I make these donuts? Whatever the case being, right? You have all these ideas, and passions, that really are going to be the fuel for you to create the thing, right? So following your passions is very important here. But then you also want to kind of create some sort of a structure for yourself, right? We have the priest, which is our Hierophant in the deck, okay? So with the Hierophant, that is that, creating some sort of a structure for us to have, some sort of success, right? You create the space for your freedom by having some sort of a routine for yourself, by having some sort of, way that you approach things. You give yourself the ability to meet whatever the circumstances, right? Somebody comes in and they say, hey, I need this, then you have some sort of a procedure or process to get from A to B so that way you can deliver that result for somebody else to be able to have what it is that you're sharing, what you're providing. And here, that is the key to your expansion, right? Our Eight of Wands. Now, normally I think of the Eight of Wands as kind of a more rapid type of energy, but right now, I'm kind of not feeling that it's necessarily instant, right? Because when I pulled this card, it was kind of like between being upright and reversed, right? You are going to get expansion, right? You have the passion, the drives, the desires, that kind of energy that says, I want more for yourself. You do the thing, you end up learning the processes, you end up learning the structure, so that way you can create the reality. And this is where your expansion comes from. Now, whether that, Eight of Wands is upright or in reverse is it's just a detail, right? It's a smaller detail because up next I have the Star. Okay, you're gonna succeed, you're gonna get the things that you hope for, that you're dreaming about, whether the water comes, you know pouring on the rocks, or whether it's pouring straight into the pond itself. Okay, the slow process or the fast process, whatever way that you're expanding, you are expanding. And this is going to help you to reach your goal. This is ultimately going to get you from where you are now to where you see for yourself. So don't get discouraged if things are going at a pace other than like how you're thinking about things, right? You want to go ahead and move from the 10 of Cups energy instead, okay? That is that joy that we have within ourselves and the enjoyment of life that naturally ends up spreading out into the physical, right? Ten of Cups being one of those, cards that, of that generational wealth. But this isn't just as much about the solid practical side as the enjoyment, the joy itself, right? Your prosperity, your wealth is going to come from it being something that, is meaningful to you, something that you can connect with others and share. And that's why, I wanted to use that bakery example, because if you are somebody who loves to cook, if you're somebody who loves to bake, when you show up and you make the thing, if you don't have those 10 customers, you show up because you like what you're doing, not because the obligation of whoever's coming to buy from you. Maybe you don't have that lady who orders like the 100 birthday cupcakes, but then you have somebody who comes in later and they order that, double chocolate layered cake with all the fancy decorations and so on and so forth, right? What you're going to be able to provide individually is going to be more valuable that right way, right? Something that you put the passion into. Now, you are going to figure out the skills, of course, to make things happen. You're going to figure out the strategies. If you're a content creator, you're going to figure out how to get your views to the right people. Or if, you're somebody who has this more physical brick and mortar kind of a business, then you're going to figure out how to get your advertisements to the right people. So that way, the people, your customers who really want what you're offering can figure out how to get to. You're going to figure out the skills that you really kind of improve the quality. And this just naturally happens along the way, right? You have that passion and then you're putting in the practice and you really develop the skills, okay? Um, this process, it's not just like the knowledge and skills and then the passion are separate because they actually pour into each other. We have temperance, okay? You're showing up each day, developing the skills, but at the same time, developing that connection, developing that passion, really kind of growing off of that. The two are going to feed into each other, right? Now, some people might find themselves looking for that instant victory, for that quick win, right? We have the Five of Swords, right? That is the victory at all costs. Now, normally you would see the, individuals fighting or, the aftermath of the battle where somebody's got the swords and the friends are really hurt. The two fairy girls here, they've got this garden, right? And they're having a hard time with this blue rose. So they go to the queen. They go, ask for her for help. You're going to still have a lot of people who are going to be looking for that traditional way of it, doing things. They're going to, say if you're building some sort of content for yourself and you go look for the advice and everybody's like, do this, do this, do this, do this. These things are going to come up, but while there's a certain amount of value in what's been tested and tried and true, you have certain qualities and simplicity. Like, you're like, okay, you know what? You're going to do the crazy, flashy thing, and I'm going to do the simple thing. I'm going to connect on this level that really kind of like, even if I'm not the life of the party, um, I am somebody who, brings joy to it. I'm somebody who brings, something that is special and unique to it. All right, that King of Pentacles being somebody who's good with their money. Maybe being good with your money isn't necessarily flashy and exciting, but if you're good with money, you're probably going to be pretty good at running a business, right? So you have that practical kind of, calmer, more, centered approach toward, whatever it is you're working on and growing toward. That authenticity itself is going to be far, far more valuable than just that quick, being like, oh, try this trick, try this hack that everybody does, and it becomes repetitive, right? You stand out because of your uniqueness. You stand out even if it is this simple, kind of quality. What you bring is more important. Okay, we have the strength card up next. Okay, and this just kind of reinforces that gentleness, right? You have a certain power. You realize that you can create for yourself. You realize that you can make the life that you want, but you don't do it from force. You're doing it from this kind of peace and this gentleness and this getting to know your own abilities and getting to know your own connection. And you find that that power exists there for you, just exists. All right, we have the Knave of Pentacles. That's our Page of Pentacles up next, right? The Page of Pentacles is one of those super super inner child cards, right? Obviously all the pages are, but I feel like the Page of Pentacles is in its own way special, as a unique kind of like inner child card. You're enjoying the fruits of life. You're not really in a hurry, right? You're just here where you are. Your feet, you see her feet just touching the the leaves over here, your feet are on the ground, okay? You don't have to be in a rush. You don't have to go from like where you're at now to where you think you're going to be in the future. You can live in the moment. And that slowed down approach, that just being in the moment, is going to give you a different perspective, right? You come into this hanged man energy, right? Maybe you see something that somebody else doesn't. Or maybe you're able to communicate something that somebody else hasn't because you're not doing the flashy, same thing that everybody else does. If you bring something unique to the table, then whoever does get your messages or whoever does get the service or product that you provide is going to find that more valuable because it's 1 in 100 instead of like 100 out of one type of a deal. And this is where you fall in love with the process. Okay, our Knight of Cups. Okay, Knight of Cups could be that romantic, individual, but I'm getting the whole in love with being in love with life. All right, you when you're creating from what you care about, when you're creating from what's special instead of just the regurgitating everything else, your enjoyment of it. You're being in the moment instead of it just being like, oh, one day when I get here, I'll be happy. You're just going to be happy at the moment, right? If you're a baker and you enjoy baking, you're just going to bake for the sake of that love. And then that sharing with others is actually what's going to bring you this kind of a new freedom. It's what's going to bring you into the Eight of Swords, okay? The Eight of Swords is that blindfolded woman, wrapped up with the ribbons around her and she's surrounded by the swords, doesn't realize that she has the ability to step away. She can take the blindfolds off. She could take the bindings off. You realize that what is natural to you, what is your joy, is in fact the thing that can take your limitations away. It's the thing that you can take off the blindfolds. It's the thing that you can take off the limitations while everybody else is still here stuck and bound up in doing things a certain way that everybody does things. They get stuck in that. They get caught in that, but you don't. You know your uniqueness, and so you operate from that, and it brings you into this King of Wands, okay? Right? You used to be this Knight of Wands, but when you come into the King of Wands, what we're talking about here is like a certain maturation of the Knight of Wands, right? Initially, you said to yourself that, like, okay, I'm going to make donuts, I'm going to make the cupcakes, I'm going to make this. But then you find that there are certain things that are more successful, right? Maybe you have this way of making the donuts, that somebody really, really enjoys. And because you enjoy baking, you decide you're going to focus down on that, right? Same passion for baking, but narrowing the focus down onto something that's going to bring you that success, that's going to really, be the thing. That's the difference between you're a baker and you are the baker that somebody wants to go to because that's, you bring that, something special to it. Okay, and then finally we have the Chariot. Okay, the Chariot is kind of an interesting card because in the Rider-Waite-Smith, the whole thing with the Chariot is that they had just left this city that had been swept through by death, right? And there's sphinxes, they're just sitting there and they're pausing and they're waiting, okay? You realize that as you're leaving behind the old things, sometimes you have to take a pause. Sometimes you kind of have to take a moment to regroup and decide where you're going to go from here. Okay. You've learned skills, you've applied your passion, and you're starting to really kind of narrow down and focus on certain specific things. And that's going to be the thing that drives you forward. That's going to be the confidence that allows you to have that balance between the feminine and the masculine, that positive and negative, right? All right, friend. I hope this was helpful for you. If it was, I would absolutely love it if you would leave a like for me. Go ahead and drop a comment. If you don't know to comment, you can leave me a sunflower emoji. In case you haven't heard, I also do fairy tales and tarot. Check out this one here. Or if you're just looking for more tarot readings, you can click on this playlist, and I'll see you in the next one.